Great. Hello, and welcome to our third annual Juneteenth webinar. This year's theme is Next Generation Leadership for Black Child and Family Wellbeing. We are so excited to have you with us today as we are looking forward to a rich conversation with 5 leaders across several fields, all of whom are 30 and younger. So I'm really excited about today's presentation. I want to first introduce myself to you. My name is Mavis Sanders. I'm Senior Research Scholar of Black Children and Families here at Child Trends, and I will be co-moderating today's discussion with my colleague, Deja Logan, and who you will see later on. And Deja will help with moderating the Q&A session. And a special thanks to Megan Trainin, who is Senior Communication Analyst here at Child Trends. And Megan has done, as usual, a fantastic job of bringing us together today. And if you have any technical issues, please just contact Megan and she will be able to assist you. And so with that, we'll get started with a little background information and a little housekeeping. This presentation is being recorded. It will be posted on YouTube, and we will let you know when it has been posted. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you will see that we have closed captions there, and there's a Q&A box for you to enter questions for our panelists. And I encourage you, as you're listening to the conversation today, if you have any questions, please put those in the Q&A box so that we can have them and include them in our discussion later in today's webinar. Just a little background. This webinar is part of Child Trends' Applied Research Agenda on Black Children and Families that was officially launched in 2022. And the goals are to produce research that highlights the cultural and contextual diversity of Black families, to focus on the systems and structures that affect Black children and families, and that informs the policy and professional practice to promote the well-being of Black children and families. Our approach is participatory, strength-based, and anti-racist. And please, we encourage you to visit our website to learn more about the research agenda and our 2 priorities for this applied research agenda. One being Black family cultural assets that Krishana Lloyd will be leading, and also protective community resources for Black children and families that I lead, with a particular focus on mental health, community safety and violence prevention, maternal and child health, and learning opportunities that extend across all ages and developmental stages for Black children and their families. The recent products that I want to bring to your attention include our review of research on Black children and families that was published in February, as well as a new research brief on protective community resources for Black children and youth. And that includes a bibliographic tool that you can use to filter over 170 studies focused on protective community resources for children and youth. So again, please visit the Child Trends website to learn more about these products. And so without further ado, I am very excited to introduce to you our 5 panelists. As I introduce them very briefly, Megan is going to place their bios and their email addresses, and they were very generous in allowing us to do that for each of the panelists. So we began in alphabetical order with Dr. Marshara Fross, who is postdoctoral scholar at the Center of Excellence in Maternal and Child Health. Luis Fernandez, founder of Youth Over Guns. Janaya Holland, who is an entrepreneur and an assistant researcher in Knoxville, Tennessee. Zani Thompson, who is project coordinator for the Reinvent South Stockton Coalition's Housing Justice Project. And Rachel Warren, who is coordinator of the Reimagined Youth Mental Health Initiative in Minnesota. And so with those introductions, I will stop sharing and begin with our first question to our panelists, each in turn. And so before I get started with the questions, I just want to again thank you so much, each of you, for accepting our offer to be a part of this panel and to just tell us a little bit more about your work and about you and what brought you to that work. And so the first question is just that. Can you briefly describe the work that you do and what brought you to this work? And we'll begin with you, Marshara, and we'll ask that each of you take about 3 minutes or so just to give us some background.
Sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Marshara Fross, as she mentioned. I am a postdoctoral scholar at the Center of Excellence in Maternal and Child Health at the University of South Florida. I'm also the creator, founder, and director of the Tampa Bay Black Maternal Health Week initiative. And so a little bit about my work, my research at least, broadly centers around studying the overexposure to racism-related stress and systemic racism and how that impacts birthing outcomes for Black and Brown mamas. And so I really focus on using a strength-based approach, specifically revolved around social support, such as father involvement, partner involvement, doula care, communal care, and kinship ties to see how we can improve these outcomes among African American and Black mamas. And so with the Black Maternal Health Week initiative, we are focused on really celebrating and acknowledging the issue because they're longstanding and we really haven't made the changes that we want to see. And so the point of the initiative is to really start at the basics, acknowledging that there's a problem, acknowledging that there's this longstanding issue. And unless we acknowledge the root causes of those issues, we aren't going to be able to move forward in a meaningful manner. And so that's the other part of my work. What brought me to this work, I have my own birth story as a Black mama. I'm a proud Black mama to 2 beautiful babies. And my son's birth, he was my firstborn. That was a really difficult and traumatic birth. I was young and very healthy. I was actually running track at the time at my college team. And I just had an awful birth experience where I met all the boxes and checked all the, things. And I was I had this specific birth experience in mind of what I wanted from my birth, and that just wasn't what occurred. And so I knew that from then on, I wanted to use my career to dedicate to improving those outcomes for other Black mamas and other Black families so they don't have to experience what I went through or a worse outcome. And so my second baby actually also was a traumatic birth, but so they are essentially the passion that feeds my or the light that feeds my passion for this work, and that's what brought me to do this work.
Thank you so much, Marshara. Luis, can you also give us a little bit of background on your work and what brought you to it?
Yes, absolutely. Pleasure to be here with you all. I'll say that as the founder of Youth Over Guns, my focus and really the bread of my work is in revolutionizing gun culture. What we know is that by empowering and uplifting young people disproportionately impacted by the consequences of gun culture, we can make a shift in cultural norms in America. What we know is that in amplifying the voices of young people and cultivating inclusive spaces for dialogue and action, we can create the environments that we wish to see, promoting healing, justice, and safety for all young people, and really being able to foster a future of resilience and well-being. What we know is that gun violence is not just a criminal justice issue, it's a health epidemic. It's something that we must continuously confront through that lens in order to see some adequate results and changes. And part of that starts and stems from what we see at a government level, but a lot of it is interpersonally. And so a lot of the work that we do is working directly with young people who identify as survivors of gun violence. Myself being a survivor of gun violence, I come from the Bronx, New York, and growing up, I witnessed firsthand what the impact of gun violence is on my family, on my community, having had lost close friends and family members to gun violence. And even in that, growing up as a teenager in New York City, um, understanding how these systems work is that so often the needs and the wants of survivors and victims of gun violence are never met or addressed. Instead, there's this hyper focus on how do we continuously criminalize a system that we perpetuate. And so it wasn't until the arrest of my 16-year-old brother, where he wrongfully spent a year on Rikers Island, that I actually became engaged in this work. He was charged for shooting another teenager, which happened to be his friend. And he was not guilty of the crime. And ultimately, that saw itself through, and he was released from Rikers Island. But that lit something in me to keep going, because one, there was a story that my brother had to tell about his wrongful incarceration and the fact that his teens were stolen from him for a year as he was placed wrongfully in Rikers Island. But there was also a story that that other boy had to tell, having had just survived slimly a shooting, and the fact that a system and policing was so focused on charging somebody for the crime and not actually meeting the need of somebody who was suffering and somebody who had just slimly survived gun violence. In that moment, brought me to do this work in the way in which I'm doing now. And in 2018, I came together with other Black and Brown young people across the state of New York to co-found Youth Over Guns, which now heeds a national effort around the country of Black and Brown young people who are confronting this very issue that is happening in all of our backyards and so often gets ignored.
It's a powerful story. Thank you so much, Luis. We're going to move to Janaya Holland now. Janaya, a little bit of background and also what brought you to this work.
So my name is Janaya Holland. Thank you everyone for being here today. So I actually have not been in community work that long. I would say I've been for probably about 3 years. I originally started with the organization in Knoxville called Seed, and I was in the career magnet program. And what happened was I was really just looking for some ways to test my mind for my business. And then I was able to participate in a research project called YPAR, which is a Youth Participatory Action Report. And during that, I got to kind of do some groundwork inside of community and really just get a feel of what was going on as me going into adulthood, because I knew what was going on in my teenage years and being in high school, but as an adult, I didn't get to see it from that lens. So I got to see that groundwork and complete this project and really get into community work that way. So after I completed that project, which took about 9 months long to complete that project, we presented it, and that was kind of like my debut to being a researcher, a social scientist is what you would call it. And we invited probably about like 100 people from over Knoxville, and they were just really excited of the work we were doing. I was like, this is a niche. So a lot of people do not do community-driven research. We really do outsourced organizations that are doing research for our city. And I'm slightly against that. So that is why I kind of started doing this work. So I have been with 3 Cubed for a year and a half. And the first project I did was with our main trauma center with UT Medical Center. And what I did was focus groups and stakeholder interviews in 19 counties in the southeastern corner of Tennessee. And working in those rural counties, I realized that people's voices were not being heard. And I also realized that these organizations are doing research, and we can call it community driven, but I feel like it needs to be from a community member. And that's just how I feel sometimes. And they were so excited to be heard, but also sitting in these meetings, it was a lot of decision making that was not for the people. So that is really my why I do what I do, is because I have the ability to sit in these meetings with organizations, but also be a voice for our community, and let them know, like, this is not the right method. We cannot go into communities without solutions. We cannot keep asking communities to get their feedback and stuff like that, and you're not giving them anything. And that's what a lot of people do, especially with our city of Knoxville. They want to like outsource and hire community, but they don't want to like provide stipends and things like that. And I'm like, but you do have the funds to provide stipends. So my why is really the biggest why I have is just really being the voice for community. And I feel like it's so necessary. And this work is so emotional and so hard. But when you have a purpose, it just keeps you going. When you know that if you don't do it, nobody else is going to do it, because we have to be a voice for our community. Because if we don't, then we don't leave the decision making up to us.
Thank you so much, Janaya. Zani, you're up.
Yeah, so um, how I got into this work. So it was about 2019, 2020. So I'm from Reno, Nevada. Basically in the mindset of like, I'm going to move with no money in my pocket and chase my dreams. I moved to Los Angeles to be a stylist slash designer. And I was working as a celebrity stylist intern with clients like Halsey, Tyga, and Offset from Amigos. And it was great for like the first couple of days, but then like being out in LA and like Beverly Hills and stuff like that, it was very jarring to me seeing so many people who were, just living in straight poverty on the streets, but to these millionaires or these well-off people in Beverly Hills, they were just a part of the sidewalk. And so they were just walking past them as if they were just a part of the sidewalk, as if they were just supposed to be there, as if they were supposed to be unhoused. And I just really couldn't continue on like and ignore these people and act like it wasn't a problem that we had people on the streets. And my mother worked for housing and urban development. So I knew for a long time that as far as like government assistance, it's there in theory, but in practice, it's really not when it comes to housing. And if you do get assistance, usually you've been waiting for years. Um, so that led to me like looking into like what could I do about that, and I ended up applying to an organization that did a community organizing academy that in North California, and so I actually packed up all of my stuff only 9 months after moving to chase my dreams, and completely switched over like the career field that I thought I had planned for myself, and started getting into social justice and just housing issues and housing related things. And so then that led to me doing the academy. And then after the academy, I became a community organizer for an organization called Faith in the Valley. There I primarily organized around housing justice. And that opened my eyes even further as I began to work with our unhoused community in Stockton. I started noticing the amount of violence that our unhoused folks were subject to, either by other folks, in encampments, or by folks who weren't unhoused, folks that were housed, but seeing unhoused folks as disposable. I had seen instances where, I mean, there was one man who was shot at point blank range simply because he owed another man about $50. Then there was another man who had all of his belongings, including his dogs, set on fire. They were locked in the cage and then set on fire simply because they stood their ground and did not want somebody who was walking past to mess with their stuff. And that person then decided to come back later and set their stuff on fire and then go back to their cozy home while this person was devastated with nothing left. So seeing all of that led to me getting into community violence interruption and gun violence reduction work as well, on top of housing justice. And that led to me applying to Cities United and their fellowship program. What I do now, at the beginning of this year, I actually took a new position as a senior project coordinator over housing justice for the organization Reinvent South Stockton Coalition, and also the senior project coordinator over neighborhood transformation as well. So I oversee the Housing Justice Coalition. And so we are made up of three subgroups. One is for eviction prevention, one is for our unhoused, and the other is for our housing element and neighborhood action plan in Stockton. In each of those subgroups, we work to basically tackle housing issues because we understand that housing issues have a lot of layers. And so we try to basically break those layers up and tackle them one by one in those subgroups. Then with the neighborhood transformation group, what we do is we basically have gone into the south side of Stockton, which is an area that has historically been has seen disinvestment and was redlined in the past. And so there's, things like not really a lot of parks, no community pools, not a lot of trees. On average, that area of Stockton is about 3 to 4 degrees hotter than the other areas just because of the lack of vegetation in the area. And so what our mission with the neighborhood transformation group is to revitalize that neighborhood. So clean up the parks, paint murals, host events in that area to basically get rid of the stigma that the south side of Stockton is nothing but violence, crime, and poverty, but also for the folks that are living there, for them to have a sense of pride and be proud of where they're from, for them to willingly and proudly say, like, I'm from the south side of Stockton and I love it there. And so that is our goal, and that is what we're working towards. And with each event, we get closer to that goal.
Thank you so much, Lonnie. And last, Rachel, can you tell us a little bit about the work that you do and what brought you to the work?
Great, thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having us. I am the coordinator of the Reimagine Black Youth Mental Health Initiative. This initiative is in Minneapolis. We are working to shift the narrative around Black youth mental health from being anti-Black to Black-centered, from being deficit-based to the honoring of the strengths and inherent goodness in Black people, and from the numbness towards Black pain to the loving and mattering of Black joy. We're also working to strengthen the ecosystem of support for Black youth and their well-being. And so we don't want to simply give coping skills to Black young people while they continue to be harmed. We want to, through systems and policy change, really stop that harm in whatever capacity we can. The impetus of this work really was rooted in the Congressional Black Caucus, who created an emergency task force and released a report titled Sound the Alarm. The goal was to really make clear the urgency of needing to address the rise in the Black youth suicide death rate. So not just attempts, but actually Black young people are dying by suicide at a rate faster than any other racial group. And so they released this report to really urge people to address this issue. So we're working with young people in grades 8 through 12, Black young people across the diaspora to really reimagine, to remember the things, that need to be remembered to ourselves, but then to reimagine some of the things that need to be changed. This work really is close to my heart. My mom was an educator, so I really learned the value of building relationships with people and the value of high expectations and then supporting people and meeting those high expectations. But I didn't want to go into education. And so I found myself in a lot of youth, family, and community work in other capacities. And in the midst of that work, I lost a 12-year-old to suicide. And, they say grief is something that you don't understand until you experience it. And I became tuned in to grief and traumatic grief in a really profound way. And that in part is what, led me to my current role as the coordinator of this initiative, to really, continue doing true community work, but also to really hone in on that mental health and well-being piece. What's good and working and well for us, and what are the traumas that need to be addressed.
Thank you so much. I think each of you has such a powerful story, and it's so significant that you were able to turn what could be trauma or traumatic or was or injustice into something positive, to take it as a call for action. And so you didn't choose easy issues, right? You've chosen difficult issues, but you're making progress, as Zani was saying. Like each step is significant because it impacts lives. So can we talk a little bit in turn, each of you, about what you see as your greatest accomplishment thus far, and what did it take to achieve it? So Let's begin. We haven't heard from you, Marshara. So can you just talk a little bit about your greatest achievement and what it took? And then we'll just go from there.
Sure. So what I perceive as my greatest achievement so far is probably our first inaugural Black Maternal Health Week of Tampa Bay. So if you don't know what Black Maternal Health Week is, Black Maternal Health Week was created in 2018 by the Black Mamas Matter Alliance. And it's a week of awareness, engagement, and activism to really lead the charge in improving and advancing Black maternal health outcomes in the United States. And so it's celebrated annually in April, and it's grown larger and larger each year, and it's celebrated nationally now. It's celebrated all across the nation. And so in Florida, we have a unique experience in that there has been a lot of recent and drastic changes in the state of Florida. And one thing that hasn't changed and actually has gotten worse is our perinatal disparities. So in 2010, the racial disparity in pregnancy-related death was roughly about 2 times more likely. Non-Hispanic Black mothers were 2 times more likely to pass away due to pregnancy-related causes. And in 2020, the Florida Maternal Mortality Review Committee found that we were now 4 times more likely to pass away due to pregnancy-related causes. And so given that there was such drastic policy changes and such drastic increases in the disparities, I felt like it was really time that we take action in creating some meaningful change. And like I said before, I felt like it was that we needed to start at the basics. We needed to start with just as a community, acknowledging where we are, acknowledging the problem, acknowledging the experience, and really doing what Rachel just talked about, Black centering that Black experience and acknowledging that as a community and really moving things forward, start there so we can move things forward in a meaningful manner. And so what I did was in Tampa, we actually have a plethora of resources available to us, organizations that have been doing, community-based organizations that have been doing this work for a very long time. And so what I did was just create a collaborative space where we could all come together and really unite our resources to create a more meaningful week where we could really gather the community and engage the community in manners where we can improve these outcomes moving forward. And so in Florida, that was not an easy feat. As you can imagine, we have, like I said, we've had policy changes about DEI, about using certain language, and we're particularly in a state-based public university where a lot of our funds are state funded. And so there was a lot of challenges there, and we had to start from scratch. We had to raise our own funding, create our own fund. We had a lot of barriers facing us because of where we are and what we were trying to do. And so the fact that we were able to create this week, we were actually able to serve nearly 400 participants in our first week. We were able to raise all of the funds we needed to cover the entire cost of the week, and we had some left over. So we're not starting from scratch this year. And so it was really a breath of, I was so proud of what we were able to do as a community and as a collective group, really trying to make this change. And it was such a meaningful experience. It was something that we've always said, hey, we want to do this. Hey, we want to do this. We would love to do this. But I was like, okay, I'll do it Ms. Holland was just talking about, where she said, oh, we have to do it ourselves. I was like, that's fine. Nobody else is going to do it. I'll do it myself. And so we created this, and I got an awesome group of people to really help me and support me and along that journey. But we were really proud of the result, and it is by far my greatest accomplishment since my career has started. So
that's wonderful, and I'm hearing from each of you this notion of collaboration, that you take this initiative. Something needs to be done. I'm going to do it, which I think is the crux of leadership. But then you're bringing other people along. So if you can, Louise, as you talk about your greatest accomplishment and what it took to get there, If you could talk a little bit about that collaboration piece, like how difficult is that, and what skill set does it require to really bring other people into this work that you're doing?
Absolutely. I I think there's so many, but one I'd hitch on for today's conversation is establishing funds to support violence intervention and prevention efforts, not just in New York, but in um, Illinois, as well as in parts of California and in DC. I'll speak to New York just because it's a prime example. In 2018, when Youth Over Guns first formed, what we initially did was march over the Brooklyn Bridge. And we didn't just march over the Brooklyn Bridge simply because it was a good landmark. We marched for the symbolism of the connecting of boroughs, of that sort of sense of collaboration, knowing that the pain that young people are feeling in Brooklyn is also felt in parts of Harlem, right? And different parts of Manhattan and the Bronx where I'm from. Understanding that the pain that we carry as Black and Brown young people is carried throughout. And so if you see the photos, and I invite you all to do a quick Google search just to see the Youth Over Guns March in 2018, we carried a casket over the bridge with us. And obviously it was something that received a widespread media attention because of the emotion that it evoked. But really, for us, it was about carrying the burden of that trauma that we feel having had lost siblings, parents, loved ones to gun violence, right? Carrying that burden of gun violence, knowing that one day it could be us, right? Or one day it was us and we nearly survived for some of the young people who were present at the march. And in that, what was most relevant was our demands, which was calling on Mayor Bill de Blasio at the time to establish a fund that will reinvest into the city's crisis management system. In New York City, we have a system that's under the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice that's deemed a crisis management system, which at the time was receiving about $5 million, which was spread throughout nearly 25 organizations, which all have sites that are deemed hotspots of gun violence throughout the city, where they have workers and staff who literally go out into the streets and stand in front of guns and bullets and intervene with gang members and other folks who are looking to retaliate because they lost a loved one to gun violence. But in that moment, as we thought about what our demands were going to be and what we wanted to accomplish, it was making sure that those efforts are invested in as much as we see policing invested in. And so we demanded an initial $20 million investment into that. That brought us to meetings with city council members, meetings with the mayor's office, several rallies and organized efforts later, and we saw that investment happen within a year span. And so now these organizations that were operating on crumbs, a couple $100s a year, we're now all operating on $1 million budgets or multi-million dollar budgets in order to expand their efforts and actually invest not just in the communities that they were serving, but in their staff and personnel, many of who were working for $30,000, $40,000 a year and having to rely on government assistance, but they were still keeping these jobs because this is what they were passionate about and they wanted to do community work, but nobody was really resourcing or supporting community work. And so the effort for us became, how do we support our communities? How do we continue to curb gun violence, but how do we invest into the people who are putting their lives on the line to stop it? And so that initiative then brought us to a statewide effort where we also led the fight to establish a statewide fund to prevent gun violence, which was passed in 2021 and continues to be invested in and grown every year since. It was passed with an initial $10 million bucket, which we continue to move and organize state agencies across the state of New York to move dollars into that fund, which essentially goes on to resource community organizations that are doing the work on the ground every single day to stem gun violence. So much of that was coalesced and seen in the national movement, which was led by folks like Erica Ford and Pastor Mike McBride through the Fund Peace movement. But for young people, a lot of that work started locally, right? We wouldn't have seen a fun peace movement if it wasn't for the local grassroots work that we were doing and that so many other young people were doing in their cities across the country to demand that the resources and the dollars that our parents, that taxpayers across our investing into government goes into solving community problems. And so that's something that I'm continuously proud of. And what I know from that experience is that it couldn't have been done if it were to have just been me. It couldn't have been done if it were to have just been our elders, because they had tried for years knocking on the mayor's door, begging for money, and had gotten no at every single turn. And so what that showed to me was not just a sense of collaboration, but the way in which we can yield power and take control of our very own communities when we work intergenerationally, when we bring together entire families to the forefront of this movement, and when we tell our stories in ways that are meaningful and set the demands for what we want to see. And so that invoked some sort of drive and passion to know that we can get it done time and time again. And we've done it. We've done it, and we continue to see it at all levels of government. And we hope that for folks who are tuned in and watching this program today, that you all think about the way in which your cities are investing into gun violence prevention efforts. And if they're not, ways in which you can partner with other gun violence prevention advocates and leaders in your community to help shift some of those dollars. Ultimately, elected officials are accountable to us. And so if they're not meeting the demand of what their constituents want to see in government, there's elections. And we encourage you all to yield your power in doing so.
I love that. And that's so important in this election year as well. And you talked about intergenerational connections. You talked about voice and amplifying the voices of the folks most affected. And I know, Janiyah, that's so much a part of what you do and the work that you do as both an entrepreneur and a researcher. So can you tell us a little bit about what you see as your greatest achievement thus far and what it took to get there?
Yeah, so I feel like my greatest achievement so far is really, from a work standpoint, is really completing the UTMC project, which is QT Medical Center. And we were able to get 236 people that were really reached during that project. And of course, I had a team behind me, but it was really still me doing that groundwork and leading that project because none of us had no network in those other counties. So that was really a big thing for me. But also, it was me learning everything that I was able to learn from that project and take it into my other projects. And just the health equity portion of it really ties into everything. And not just the health equity portion of it, but also the racial equity portion of it. So during that project, I was able to go through it and really do a racial equity lens. And I feel like that ties into our health. We don't really understand how tied we are to our ancestors. So I was able to include that in that portrait. But the community engagement piece. The community engagement piece is so important when it comes to community-driven research. And I have recently been working on a curriculum for community engagement and a plan for that. And I was in Louisville last week with National League of Cities doing a action plan for childcare. And when we were doing it, it was a city from Charleston, North Carolina, and they were saying how they have an education department in United Way now, but they do not know how to get involved with the community. So learning that something so simple, and I feel like I was gifted with it. I truly do, because I don't even know how I know how to do it, and I don't even really just do that much. But learning that there is a need for knowing how to do community-driven research and engaging with communities. I feel like I really got more insight on that during the UTMC project and learning how to go into communities. And again, making sure community is heard. So when we were going into these rural counties, some of them are in a health desert, no hospitals, or either they have to travel 45 minutes to go to a doctor. The Hispanic population was really a target that we hit. So we did regular focus groups and then we did Hispanic focus groups in a few counties too. in Tennessee. And when we were doing that, these people are suffering from chronic illnesses because they do not have access to healthcare. So really bringing highlight on that and making them feel like they're heard and able to tell someone, and not just tell someone, but also just bringing highlight to it because it's going to be included into these health portraits that are almost completed. We just finalized the documents last week, so they will be made to the public. But I feel like that really is my biggest accomplishment because I just got to learn so much and really just imagine like going into a city and you know no one. So I was going into these counties and having to build relationships with people and knowing absolutely no one. And that was so different for me.
Powerful. And so lifting up voices, exercising power is all a part of making changes in the work that you're doing. So Zani, as it relates to lifting up voices and mobilizing folks for change, what's your greatest accomplishment as it relates to housing justice, and what did it take to achieve it?
I mean, off the top of my head, I'm thinking about last year, the Biden administration released a roadmap to a tenants' Bill of Rights. That roadmap was a result of multiple meetings with White House officials as they were basically researching how to tackle housing issues across the country. And so a campaign that I was a part of called the Homes Guarantee Campaign basically brought together folks from across the whole country, from New York, from California, from Florida, wherever there were housing issues, we tapped in and got folks from those areas. So basically across the whole country. And we brought them together and we all came together and we basically had a couple of goals that we were trying to accomplish. One being a tenants' Bill of Rights, a national tenants' Bill of Rights that would strengthen strengthen tenants' arguments when they are going up against landlords, especially in evictions courts, because those landlords versus tenants in evictions courts, like the power imbalance is way too great, and which is what's leading to a lot of folks basically being ushered into being unhoused by being evicted and then not being able to provide or get adequate housing after because they have an eviction on their record. And then basically it's a slippery slope that at the end of it, I mean, by the end of it, you end up unhoused. And so we were trying to fight against that, but then also we wanted the president to sign an executive order that would limit the amount that rent could be increased year over year to nothing more than 3%. Now, we had met with his advisors for years, about 2 years, yeah. And then we had met with folks in Congress as well, Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush, and some other folks. And they had even written letters to the Biden administration, urging them to sign this, urging him to sign this executive order. Then, as our final big push, we flew 100 folks out from all over the country, folks who had dealt with issues with their landlords, folks who were unhoused, or organizers, folks who were organizing and bringing together folks in their community. We all came together in DC. We held a rally at the White House where certain folks came and gave their stories, their testimonies on their struggles to obtain housing or their struggles to obtain housing, but then also their struggles when it came to maintaining housing as well. And then we also then met with some folks in Congress as well. We also met with Marshall Fudge at Housing and Urban Development. Unfortunately, while the roadmap to a Bill of Rights was great, the Apartments Association and a bunch of other housing lobbyists came in and got in the president's ear right before he was getting ready. Like they had sent out a notice to us that an announcement was going to get made soon, and so we thought that it was going, like we had basically won the campaign. And unfortunately, we found out that the housing lobbyist kind of got in his ear. And so instead, he released that roadmap to a tenants bill of rights. So it fell short a little bit, but we still counted it as a win because at least it kept the conversation going. And it brought the housing issues that everybody is facing. We know a lot of people are forfeiting most of their income to housing every single month. But for some reason, when it comes to issues that are talked about on the national stage in presidential debates and things like that, that's something that nobody wanted to talk about. Everybody was obsessed with gas prices, but they weren't talking about the fact that a one-bedroom apartment in some places was $2,000. But now, due to some of the work that was done in that roadmap to a tenants bill of rights, that's a conversation that we're having, and it's a conversation that was more than needed. So that to me was probably one of the biggest accomplishments. But then also, for me, one of the biggest accomplishments is when I hear my leaders or anybody that I have basically impacted in a positive way actually say it. You know, when we're doing this work, we know in our hearts that it's like, this is positive work, this is passion work, but it just hits different when somebody comes up to you and says, you know, I don't know what I would have done had we not met, or I didn't know that, you know, my voice could be heard, what I was experiencing could be heard had we not met. And so when I have leaders come up and, you know, just tell me how much the work that we have done together has positively impacted them, and when they start talking about how they want to start building a career out and positively impacting other folks the same way that I did to them, to me, that's the biggest accomplishment.
I appreciate that. And so, Rachel, we're hearing that for some, it's really mobilizing across states. It's gathering the funding that's needed to do this work. It's keeping the conversation going. It's creating initiatives that bring people together focused on the issues. For you, as you look at youth mental health, what would you say is your greatest accomplishment to date, and what did it take to get you there?
Yeah, I think it's really cool, the through line between all of our work, just hearing some of the words around like intergenerational connection and financial resources. I mean, all of that really resonates, you know, in my answer as well. But I would say one of the greatest accomplishments that we've had is doing what we say we're going to do. Just being impeccable with our words so that when we say Black centered, you know, it means Black centered in its fullness. When we say youth led, we've really defined what that means and looks like with young people. When we say community driven, you know, we're carrying it out in a way that's true to what community feels, you know, is community driven. So I think with tenacity and intentionality, showing that something can really be done in that way has been our greatest accomplishment. You know, people are trusting and loving the process and feeling seen and reflected and connected in it. People are being changed by how we're doing things, and it's giving hope and light. And that means something to me. I would say that really is the greatest accomplishment. I think being intentional and taking the time to take the time. You know, we've taught adults that youth led doesn't mean adults do nothing, but rather that they're the infrastructure. You know, we've honored the fact that they need to be well to do well work. And that, you know, collective healing is key for adults and young people. That's that intergenerational piece. You know, that we need each other more than we're allowed to believe, and that we need rest in order to do this work. So really grounding our work in some of those values and being intentional about being true to what we say has been huge. You know, we've created a Black youth space for young people to really feel connected to this work and take the lead. And that's really different than often how it's set up, where, you know, 2 or 3 young people may sit on an adult advisory council, and that's considered youth voice. But is that really considered youth voice, you know? And so how do you create a space that's for adults, because adults need each other and need to rest and need to be well? And how do you then create a space for young people, because young people need young people, and then merge those spaces so that we have a collective? So that's been like one big highlight. You know, we carried out a truly youth-led and adult supported summit. with over 200 Black youth in grades 8 through 12. That was another highlight. So it's really the collection of moments that I see as our greatest accomplishment. You know, in terms of what it took to get here, or what it took to accomplish, I would say one of the big things is, for me, was being sure of myself, of knowing when I know, that the collective is everything, you know, that youth are everything, and, you know, just every good thing. So knowing that, being confident and sure in that, and then acting on it no matter what. You know, in terms of collaboration and intergenerational connection, it also took some really genuine people in my corner. You know, they always say it matters who you know. And I think it matters who you get to know. Breaking down some of my own walls and like letting people who I never thought would support me show up for me was huge.
I love that. And the words intentional, impeccable, and knowing what you know and being confident in moving forward with that, I think is so essential to the leadership and each one of your stories. And as we come to like this final question for this main portion of today's webinar, I would love to hear a little bit more about how in this present moment, as you look forward, in a way that's really intentional around your work, what do you hope, what would you like to see in your area of focus in the next 5 years? And then the second part of that is, how can research help you to sort of realize this vision that you have? And I guess as moderator, I should give some guidance on who is going to answer first. So Marshara, we haven't heard from you in a minute. So can you talk a little bit about, in the next 5 years, what would you like to see? I mean, Florida, unfortunately, seems to be going not in the direction that you would hope, right? You're going from 2 times to 4 times the maternal death rate or disparities in maternal outcomes. So as we think about 2029, 2030, what would you like to see, and how can research help?
So I'd like to see a lot of things, to say the least. But to start, like, one thing that with this collaborative space we've created, if you go and look at some of the things that we did with the week, one of our last and final events, we actually had the House Minority Leader, Fentrice Driscoll, for the state of Florida, was actually present at that event, and she was a panelist, and we were able to have some really honest, very perspective driven conversations about how we move things forward. What are some realistic, attainable actions that we can take given what our government looks like? We don't have the government of New York. We don't have the government of California. And so with our state government, with it looking the way it looks right now, we can't just do nothing. What can we do? What are some actionable steps that we can take to advocate for Black mamas, babies, families in the state of Florida right now? We have so many of our physicians, of our researchers, of our community advocates leaving in droves because of the state of Florida and because of the climate. And the reality is, in Florida, we actually have the second largest volume of non-Hispanic Black births in the country, only narrowly behind Texas. And so we can't just all up and leave Florida. And that we have to have people here to support and really be here to uplift the folks that are here and of need in our communities that are in need. And so what we would like to see in the next few years is really taking those, we came together, we created these actionable steps, we outlined things that we can actually do, similar in alignment with what was talked about today, creating some funding, some sustainable funding that we can create on our own with our own communities, our own networks, to really create that system of funding where we can sustain ourselves. Really taking some actionable steps towards improvement. So how research comes into that is and from my perspective, I'm a mixed methods researcher. I really feel like taking a comprehensive lens, understanding what are we seeing in the data, what are the patterns telling us, where do the problems lie, and really understanding the why behind those problems through qualitative data, through engaging your community and bringing those to life and addressing those problems for the community that is most at risk. And so that is really what we're driving our initiatives around, driving our action steps around, is really those, where are our biggest problem areas and what is our community telling us about those problem areas and how we can resolve them. And so that is how we created our action plan, our strategic steps, our next steps moving forward to address those, not only those main key areas that we're seeing in the health outcomes, but what our community is telling us about how these health outcomes are manifesting and how we can best address them. So what that really comes with is both creating a system of funding where we can sustain ourselves and do this work, and also ensuring that we're remaining community rooted, we're remaining community driven, we're remaining data driven, evidence-based, to really create those actionable improvement and asymmetrical improvement in perinatal health outcomes. It needs to be a key, we don't want to say it, but it needs to be an asymmetrical improvement in birth outcomes. That means Black mothers need to have significantly better birth outcomes than what they're having right now. And so that means acknowledging that, accepting that, and doing what we need to do to address that.
Thank you. And the notion that doing nothing is not an option, right? Like running away from the issue is not an option. Doing nothing is not an option. It's building on the work that you've already done. And so, Louise, you've given a powerful example of how funding can be organized at a broad level, at a high scale. And Marshara, you have given us an example of how at the grassroots level that funding can begin. And so I hope that you two will be in conversation with each other after today's panel. But Louise, as you look 5 years down the line, let's just call it a 2030 vision, what is that in the area of community safety and violence prevention? And can research play a role in supporting that vision?
Absolutely. I mean, I think as I said, right, the picture has been drawn, and it's not something that we need to continue to pan about, right? In the next 5 years, we need to see a significant regression in the data that indicates gun violence is a leading cause of death among children and teens in America, point blank, period. What we know is that this stark and tragic reality underscores the urgency of the work that I do, of the work that violence preventionists and CVI workers are doing across the country. My goal is to create a world and an environment where young people can grow up free from the threat of gun violence, and really understanding that every child deserves to thrive in safe environments. Achieving this is something that requires the effort of each and every person, to have just mere common sense, right? We're not asking for abstract laws or policies. We're not asking for an abundance of resources to go towards one thing and not the other. What we're asking for is to keep children safe, right? To create and implement comprehensive community-based violence prevention programs that have proven track records of success. These programs should always involve local leaders. They should also involve mental health professionals. They should collaborate with young people and really identify from the community of people that you wish to serve, what do they want, right? So often we're looking to solve for crises without actually addressing the people in crises. And I'm one to always know that those closest to the pain and those closest to the problems are always closest to the solutions as well. So often young people are left out of the conversation, and solely bringing one young person in the room can change the direction of an entire meeting or effort. But think about if we implement some of what Rach was saying, right, and creating entire bodies of young people where you give them the autonomy and the space to lead and their own capacity, and then you bring adults in the room and let them meet somewhere down the middle, right, and identify what's going to work. Ultimately, as young people, we're the ones inheriting this world, right? I think about 5 years from now, my 11-year-old little sister is going to be coming of age, right? Coming into her womanhood. And I think about the world that she's going to inherit, and the ways in which she is already concerned about the world that my nieces and nephews are going to inherit. My nephew, who's just a month old yesterday. So these are the things that people need to think about on an everyday basis, right? When we think about mentorship opportunities, when we think about after school programs, when we think about creating safe spaces that young people can engage in positive activities, it's really just about resourcing young people with the things that we know work, and making sure that all young people have access to it regardless of their zip code. So often the access to basic resources is determinant on where you live and where you come from and the financial status of your parents, and that should never be a thing, but continues to be a thing in cities across the country. And what I know is that research has always and will continue to play a critical role in this vision. In order to do this work, we need robust data that identifies the most effective strategies for reducing gun violence. It's what allows us to understand the underlying causes of gun violence. And I urge folks whose work relies on research to continue to conduct these thorough studies, right? To analyze the trends and help us who are in the field every day develop targeted interventions that address the specific needs of our community. Research can aid even in policy change at a local, state, and federal level, providing evidence-based recommendations on what they analyze and what they see. And what's so often not spoken about, but I find to be true in this work, is that when research institutions say it, people listen, right? We sort of need the affirmation of researchers to not just talk to our work, but to advocate for our work, to do their side of the work, and really studying it, analyzing it, writing up the numbers, and showing it in black and white in a way that Americans understand more than anything, both in our legal system, but also in everyday life. So often we see strategies that are proven to be effective, not invested in up until there's some sort of research behind it that shows, oh, evidence is showing that this works because we track XYZ trends and have seen that over the years, young people who participated in this program are no longer susceptible to being victims of gun violence or being perpetrators of gun violence, right? And so these are the things that we need to think about and how we combine the work that we do with research. And so again, the call is always out. We need more people doing research around violence prevention methods and intervention methods that work, because it's going to be what allows us to improve our work, but also is going to be what allows us to obtain the permanent funding infrastructures to keep this work going up until we no longer need it. And we know that we're years away from that. It's definitely not a 5-year thing that we're going to solve. But what I do hope to see and wish to be true in 5 years is that statistic of gun violence being the leading cause of death among children and teens dramatically regresses itself through the work that everyone does in all your different bodies of work, because what we know is that the root causes of gun violence are exactly what everybody on this webinar is talking about: homelessness, Black maternal health, children's health, and schooling and education, right? The resources that children have or don't have in their communities. All of these root causes, and the pandemic itself showed us that, are what exacerbates gun violence in communities across America. The data that came post-COVID showed homicides, suicides, all rates of gun violence dramatically inclining, right? And that was because the root causes that have for years had already impacted and had been the brunt of why we see gun violence in community were now far worse, right? Unemployment rates went up, homeless rates went up, right? The health and presence of parents. So many people lost parents. There were more single parent households than ever before, right? We saw so many more people no longer in schools with virtual and remote settings. So we now had more young people than ever not in school, not attending their classes, not even showing up to their Zoom meetings, and instead in the streets without resources or an open center or anything for them to do, which made them susceptible to, again, either being a victim or a perpetrator of gun violence. And so telling the story through both angles is also crucial and important.
Thank you so much, Luis. And Janaya, I think this goes to a lot of the work that you do. So again, we're talking about research that is youth-led, community engaged, that's tracking trends, that is identifying, sources of issues and problems, that are evaluating programs. So research more broadly, we've already heard, is so important. When you think about your work in 5 years, what would you like to see that is different in the work that you're doing? And how do you see research related to that?
So I'm going to answer it from an entrepreneur point, and then I'm going to answer it from a research point. So from an entrepreneur point, I have hopes that eventually we will have more resources for our youth. And that falls into entrepreneurship, that falls into mental health resources, that falls into just resources of daily living, because we do have a lot of teens that are raising themselves, not even just single parent households, like a lot of teens that are raising themselves that are homeless and having to have 2 jobs and find a way to school on their own without a parent whatsoever, without grandparents. So my hopes is just to have more resources for teens and middle school students, especially when it comes to mental health. But from a research point of view, I would say from a local point, more funding. And I feel like it is funding, but it's more gate kept. Like it goes to the same organizations, and it's basically on who you know. And the people that are actually doing the real work are underserved and underpaid, and that's not fair. So I do truly have hopes that there is more funding available for the organizations in the US as a whole, because I'm realizing it's really a thing in the US, I guess, um, where the people that are doing the groundwork are funded, and it's not so hard for them to get funding because you do apply for grants. But if you don't have a particular background, or if they don't know you, they make it seem like it's during the grant process that it's not. I guess they make it seem like it's not very targeted, but it is at the same time, because they do at the end of the day pick who they want to pick, and it is on a need to know basis on who they know. So my 2 things would be more funding for researchers and people doing groundwork, and also more resources and more funding for teens, especially in entrepreneurship. And I think that will dial down the rate of the graduation rate and the rate of failed college students, because not everybody wants to go to college. And I'm not against college. There's nothing wrong with college. It definitely gives you a different perspective on life when you go through college. But college is not for everyone. And I think that we have to stop pressuring graduates to go into college, because that's just setting them up for failure when they can go through entrepreneurship, because it is capable, and that is a way to build wealth just as much as college is a way to build wealth.
Great, thank you, Zani. We're talking about expanding opportunities, we're expanding options for Black children and youth, as well as families and communities, so that they can all thrive. In 5 years, what would you like to see in housing, and how can research help? And I'm going to ask that you give us, take 90 seconds or a minute and a half, and Rachel as well, so we can get some questions from the audience before we close.
Yeah, I'll keep it quick. Okay, wait, can folks hear me? Okay, cool. So one, I would say in 5 years, I would love to say in a perfect world that all housing issues would be eradicated, but since we know that that's most likely not going to be the case, I would just like to see more wraparound services. At our organization, we have this thing where we call it, we need to see a 360 approach. And basically what we mean by that is, you can put somebody in 4 walls and a roof and say that's home, but to them, that's probably not home. Maybe that's a giant first step, but there's a lot more that goes into calling a place home. for a person, you know, and so you've got to foster that sense of safety and community and all of these other things in order for it to really be a home for a person. And so we're looking at what we want is like more like wraparound services and a more 360 approach that's going to really take a person who is dealing with homelessness or getting priced out of their home or whatever their issue is as it pertains to housing. And it's going to basically see them through until they no longer need assistance whatsoever and not going to leave them high and dry with like the bare minimum of assistance when it comes to their housing situation. And then when it comes to, and the way that data can help is that one thing that we see a lot in Stockton is this watering down of data where they like make things so very specific to where they can exclude folks in order to make the numbers not look as bad as they are. But when you're doing that, you're not going to find a solution that's adequate enough in order to actually basically deal with the issue that's at hand as far as the current housing crisis. So when it comes to data, what we need is for it to be very blunt and honest about who is unhoused, about what they're dealing with and things like that, you know, because in Stockton, right, we have our point in time count. However, there's so many folks who are unhoused, but they're couch surfing. They're unhoused, but they still work a day job so they can pay for a motel and things like that. And they're not counted in our unhoused population. And so when these counts come out, they like I think a couple years back after the pandemic. So we knew that the housing situation was worse, but the count came back as like only 1,000 or something like that unhoused folks, and we knew that that was way under. But it was because of these like specifics and these stipulations where they could exclude folks and be like, oh well, technically you're not homeless, but we know that they are. And so like more transparent data that's not watered down is needed in order to adequately address these issues when it comes to getting our folks housed, especially those who are in Black and Brown families, because a lot of times there are a lot of youth that are growing up homeless, but they're not going to say anything because if they do say something, that means being separated from their family. That means being placed in a home that is not home to them, where they don't know these people, and basically completely ripping them from the only family and home that they do know. And so they sit there and they suffer in silence, and these families are suffering. They're going from motel to motel, from house to house. And these children are going to school and they're dealing with all of these issues. And then teachers are wondering why they're underperforming. Teachers are wondering why they're violent. Or why they're having outbursts and things like that. And they can't say anything because they don't want to risk being separated from their mother or their father or their older sister or whatever. So also making it to where there are resources that don't lead to that type of separation of families, but still there are resources that unhoused youth can tap into.
Yes, thank you. And Rachel, I think this dovetails so importantly with your work around mental health, the notion of the importance of wraparound services, the notion of the importance of transparent data that is actionable, that really helps to elucidate the issue as opposed to sort of hide the issue. When you think in 5 years, what would you like to see in terms of youth mental health, and what is the role of research from your perspective?
So just in the for the sake of time, I'm going to answer really the second part, and I got a really brief answer for you, Ms. Sanders. The answer I have is stop asking the same question over and over and over and over when collecting data. You know, when community has given you the answer, respond to it with them. Don't let data, don't let the getting data over and over help you to avoid doing anything with that data. Once the data is collected, once the data is analyzed, use it.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for your brevity, but also for the insight. We know that research is important, but asking the right questions and then making sure it's actionable research. Research that people can then use to resolve or address issues rather than call for more research in that particular area. So we appreciate that as well. Deja, I think we may have sufficient time for a couple of questions from the audience. So if you can pose those, and maybe we can have the panelists who are most interested in that question respond. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for sharing your powerful experiences and perspectives so far. I encourage the audience to continue to ask questions because right now we just have one. So this question is for anyone. What role does family of origin play in the issues of gun violence, physical health, and mental health?
So I can speak on that. I feel like we like village in this day and age, but also adults that are parents don't really know, and we weren't taught. So it's definitely generational. We don't know how to regulate our emotions and realize what we say to our children and just really playing a role in our child's life when it comes to like being emotionally intelligent. And that does play into the gun violence and things like that, and making sure we're holding our kids accountable to the decisions that they make. So I feel like that is the origin that families plays when it comes to like the crime rates and things like that. And I feel like it falls into our village because a lot of cities have or are creating those gun violence prevention organizations that have violence interrupters to intervene with these situations. But sometimes it's not meant for us to put it in our own hands. Sometimes it's meant for us to call on to those organizations that are trained to be mediators and things like that and diffuse the situations before they even happen. And that falls into holding our kids accountable because sometimes we can fix problems before it is even a problem. So think that it is a problem and address it before it actually is a problem. So yes, I feel like that is how families play into the origin of homicides and things like that.
I'll jump in here as well just to speak to it from the gun violence perspective. What I know, I mean, one, the mission at Youth Over Guns is to revolutionize gun culture. And precisely it has a lot to do with family of origin and really the cultural and societal norms that come into play based on where we grow up, who we grow up around, who influences us in the household and outside the household at an early age. The cultural attitudes and belief held by a family regarding guns and gun violence can play a critical role on a child and whether or not they grow up to be a perpetrator of gun violence. Families that promote peaceful conflict resolution, teach nonviolent values, contribute to reducing gun violence in their communities will likely see and produce a child who does the same, right? What we know is that what you see around you growing up and what you're soaking in, young children are like sponges, right? They're soaking up not just what they're being taught, but everything in their surrounding. If you see a child who's cursing, right, you might go to them and say, hey, where'd you learn that, right? And they're going to tell you exactly who they heard said it, where they heard that person say it, and why or why not they thought it was okay for them to say it. And those are indicators that we see at play when it comes to gun violence as well. And that can, again, more precisely turn into other things, right, that relate to parental guidance and supervision, the presence or lack thereof of a parent in the household, and the ways in which that can adversely affect a young person and the risk factors that come with gun violence. But also early exposure and the normalization of violence, right? Children who grow up in homes where gun violence or domestic violence specifically is a norm, is an acceptable behavior, right? This early exposure desensitizes them to the consequences of violence. And it will result in one or two things. A child who resents the parent that was an abuser and no longer wants to be around them and ultimately is affected by that and the trauma of that for the rest of their lives, or a child who thinks that that type of behavior is okay and starts to embody the characteristics of that abusive parent. And what we know is that so often it's not spoke about, but domestic violence is one of the leading and interrelational trauma is one of the leading causes of gun violence, right? What we see is that intimate partner violence is impacting not just women, but men and families across the country. So often there's studies, and this comes to the research question as well. So many times there's studies and data about the ways it's impacting the partner who's suffering the consequences of that intimate partner violence. But there's not many stories or data showing the impact that that's having in the children who are bearing witness to it all in the household, and so often are left to suffer with the trauma of their experiences in, as the question posed, in our origin families.
I just want to add really quickly and speak to that intertwining of our mental health and our physical health. It's really those burdens that we carry. We carry particularly in the African American and Black communities, we tend to carry the burdens, not only our burdens, but the burdens of our grandmothers, our mothers, our fathers, and we shoulder all of those burdens. And the weight that carries translates and manifests in our physiological health and our mental health. Through our mental health, really and manifest as physiological outcomes. Those racial disparities that we see across the board in everything from heart disease to pregnancy, right? Those are all manifestations of that intertwining of those overexposure to stressors, overexposure to carrying those burdens across generations, that generational trauma. We've seen in the pregnancy realm, in the birthing experience, that generational trauma impacts births from generations before us. And so that when we're thinking about that family origin, particularly among African American and Black communities, that is such an important piece that I just wanted to speak to really quickly, that, you know, those burdens that we carry and we tend to shoulder are not only our own burdens, but the burdens of our families and our communities.
Thank you all. Those are great answers. We have another question that came in the chat. What strategies can schools implement to support the success and inclusivity of Black students and their families? I think maybe I want to direct this one at Rachel, since she works a lot with Black youth.
Sure, no, I'd love to answer that. Thank you, Deja. I'm going to answer actually from what Black youth told us. We held a summit about a year ago, and then we held some post-summit school assemblies where we connected with another about 160 people. So I kind of referred to that earlier, but I'll answer from what they said. The biggest thing is give Black people the space to create our own space and have our voices heard. So dedicated spaces for Black students in schools supported by Black adults, more opportunities for Black people to come together in positive ways. Another piece is make sure Black youth are safe at all times. That includes safety in schools from racism, safety on social media from bullying, and safety in the community from gun violence. Third, prioritize the needs of Black youth that are defined by Black youth, real responses to issues that Black youth bring up. Provide more education on Black history and culture more often, including learning beyond academics. So Black history and culture through K-12 curriculum, not just Black History Month, more books by Black authors, uplifting Black cultures in ways that prepare Black young people for life outside of school in a positive, inherent goodness kind of way. More Black teachers in schools. That means teachers in the classroom, not Black behavior staff and lunchroom personnel and student advisors and coaches. More Black teachers in the classroom teaching curriculum. And lastly, ensuring that there's mental health support for Black families. I know the last question was on family, but there's a lot of generational trauma that young people are navigating without even sometimes knowing they're navigating it. And so in whatever capacity your school can offer high quality family therapy and build relationships with parents, guardians, decision-making adults in the lives of young people, that's key. And those relationships are key in terms of getting buy-in from parents to be a part of the healing of their families and of the wellness of their young people.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was great. And I think that also addresses a few other questions we got about how professionals and educators can provide meaningful support to Black youth. I do want to pass it back over to Mavis because we do have one final question for our panelists.
And this is great because I also saw in the Q&A, Deja, a question around what inspires our panelists. So it's perfect because we wanted to close with that question anyway. And so it gives us a third question from the audience. So I want to first thank you again. I want to thank you for not only participating in today's discussion, but I really want to thank you for all the work that you are doing. And I want you to know how important it is and how inspiring it is. And so with that word inspiration, I want you to each take about 30 seconds and just tell us who or what inspires you. And I know we've been starting with Marshara, but we're going to go ahead and start with Rachel, and then we'll just go backwards. So Rachel, and then Zani, and then Janaya, Luis, and we're going to end with Marshara. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you everyone who has attended and stuck on until this final moment. It's a pleasure being here. So I have 3 key inspirations. It's God, my ancestors, and my mom. You know, God first, others second, I'm third. And because God is first, I have everything I need to put others second and myself third. And so I can do that with joy over exhaustion. I firmly believe that I'm the only person who can do what I was put on this earth to do. There's a Greek word, hexaidy, and it means your thisness, the thing that makes you you. It's an irrepeatable thing. You are a once in eternity creation in my belief of God. And that said, I have to carry out my calling. And so that keeps me inspired. My ancestors, the people who came before me, you know, I love Black history. I love my elders. I love the wisdom of those who have paved the way. They carry so much wisdom. And then, of course, my mom. She's the woman who really shaped me into who I am today. I reaped all that she sowed and am forever grateful. She inspires me to be the best version of myself and to make her proud. So those are the 3 things that really keep me going.
Okay, so what inspires me and keeps me going? One, definitely feel you, Rachel, on God. I always want to be walking in purpose. And so I think that the best way to do that is to always maintain a relationship with God and to make sure that, you know, what I'm doing, that He's ordering my steps, essentially. And I've seen the downsides of not walking with Him and not walking in purpose, and I've seen the upsides of walking in purpose and following, letting God order your steps. So definitely that's at the top. But then the other is my sister. She was my biggest cheerleader. Always really wanted to see just greatness, really seeing greatness in me, and always pushed me to go further, to do things beyond what I could imagine. I lost her to cancer a month ago, and genuinely, if it wasn't for wanting to make her proud, I don't think that I would be doing any of this work anymore, and I probably would have just like left it all behind. But wanting to make sure that at the end of each day of hard work, that it would be something that she would be able to smile down on, keeps me going.
Thank you so much, Zani. We are sorry for your loss, but may she rest in peace and power. Yes, Janaya.
I think what inspires me is really building my relationship with God and listening to what He told me to do, but also my son. I just remember looking at a statistic that was saying that the 99 or 98% of single mothers with a Black son, they end up in prison. And I was just like, okay, well, not mine. So that was really my why, but also again, just being in community. Like I just love to socialize and be in community. I don't do it for the money. I don't do it to be on a platform or be recognized or anything. Like I really do not care about that. I feel like sometimes I talk and people are like, why don't you talk about, you even said it like a few times, you were like, why don't you say more about this? And I'm like, I don't really care about it. So I feel like being in those types of in these type of spaces are really my why. It just feels so important to me, and it just warms my heart.
Louise?
There we go. Couldn't find my unmute button. I mean, one, my condolences, Zani. Much love to you and your family. And I think I'm one just taken aback by the fact that I'm surrounded by fellow people who are God-fearing and God-loving. I think that it's important and critical to the work that we all do. There's a quote that I love to share with folks, and the quote goes, "I used to ask God to help me, then I asked God if I might help him. I ended up by asking God to do his work through me." And I think that's what keeps me going, and um, in some ways inspires me to keep showing up. Ultimately, I think I've been doing this work for going on 9 years now. And when I say that, even people around me and close to me are taken aback by it, just because I'm so young, right? Which it goes to show I've been in this work um, in a full-time basis since the age of 14. And so much of that is because I am rooted in community. I'm rooted in love. And as somebody who was also raised by a single mother, know what it means to keep going even when things hit the fan, knows what it means to stay 10 toes down even when resources aren't coming through the door, knows what it's like to maintain not just positivity and well-being to keep ourselves going in this work, but to do it with such a joy that radiates and inspires others. And so as much as I am inspired by God as well, I'm also inspired by young people who show up to this work with unique stories and traumas that others in comparison wouldn't be able to get up out of a bed, and they show up every day and do this work with all that pain and wear that on their sleeve. And I'm consistently inspired by the way in which my peers are able to do that. And it's essentially what not just inspires me, but motivates me to show up every single day.
Thank you so much, Louise. And Marshara, what inspires you?
So I actually, similar to Ms. Holland, I had to learn to bring my full self to the work that I do. And an important part of that for me is, as the others have mentioned, is God. Understanding that I know who orders my steps, I stand steadfast in my purpose, and I am aligned in what I am supposed to be doing and who I'm doing it for. And so that is an important part to me that, you know, if you look at my posts on social media and everything else, I know that, you know, through this mission and being specifically here, being in Florida, being in a place where, you know, everyone says, you know, looks at, when I say I'm in Florida, oh my gosh, how are you surviving? I know I am standing steadfast in my purpose. I know I am where I'm supposed to be, when I'm supposed to be here, and doing what I'm supposed to be doing, because I trust my faith. I know who is aligning my steps and really putting me in the work I'm supposed to be doing. So that's the first thing. And then second, as I spoke about my children, they are the light that feeds my passion for this work. I really what's important to me is creating a brighter, better future for the Black families of the future, for my children, for your children, for our sisters, our cousins, our brothers. That is what the other piece that is really, really important to me, really drives me, is that I want better for the future than what we have. And then the last thing is I know I stand on the shoulders of giants. I know I stand on, my ancestors have blazed a trail, that they have been through things that I can only imagine in my wildest dreams. And I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. I am doing exactly what they have wanted us to do, and creating a future that should have been their experience, that should have been their reality, and was robbed from them. And so I am driven by understanding that I'm creating a reality that our ancestors should have experienced, and I'm standing on the shoulders of those giants.
Thank you all. I know that you are busy, people, but you have stayed with us and you have inspired us, and we are so thankful for your leadership, and we feel more secure in the future of this country, this nation, all of our communities, because we know that you are part of that leadership for the future. So again, thank you so much. And to our audience, thank you for staying with us, and have a safe and restorative Juneteenth holiday. Thank you all. Bye-bye.